and welcome to the Dr. Tech Show, where myself, Pauline, Roche, and Sweyn Hunter, and often guests, guide you through the world of online communications in a show which is the brainchild of the late and greatly missed John Popham. And in traditional fashion, we do a weather report. Let's start with our special guest, Alastair Somerville. Alastair, how are you? Where are you? And how's the weather there?
Hi, I'm in Stroud in Gloucestershire, and it's extremely sunny.
Excellent. And Sweyn, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm in Orkney as usual, in Kirkwall. Yesterday we were saying we really need a fifth season, which would run from the middle of February to about the middle of April up here, which is called Not Yet Quite Spring. But today it's a beautiful, sunny, slightly very hazy in the distance, calmish, lovely spring day. So I was wrong, maybe.
Well, here in Birmingham, we had a bluer sky earlier. It's clouded over slightly now, but it's still plenty of blue, and I'm looking forward to getting out in that in the afternoon. And I had my breakfast in the garden this morning, which was really delightful. A wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to do. And so before we go to our special guest, we'll go through our usual things that we do before we start with the guest, and some days and events we found out that people are celebrating. And the first one on the 18th of March is World Sleep Day 2022. And I hope this is as exciting for other people as it is for me. As I've said before, I think on the show, sleep is something I struggle with from time to time. Not going to bed early enough is usually the problem. But if I can overcome it, I'm sure a little bit happier. So this year's World Sleep Day is going to be Friday, the 18th of March. It's an annual event intended to be a celebration of sleep and a call to action on important issues related to sleep, including medicine, education, social aspects, and driving. The blurb for the website, which I'm sure Sweyn has up on the screen at the moment. Yes, he does. And I can, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Says that most sleep disorders are preventable or treatable, yet less than 1/3 of sufferers seek professional help. Sleep problems constitute a global epidemic that threatens health and quality of life for up to 45% of the world's population. Better understanding of sleep conditions and more research into this area of medicine will help reduce the burden of sleep disorders on society. World Sleep Day is organised by the World Sleep Day Committee of World Sleep Society and aims to lessen the burden of sleep problems in society through better prevention and management of sleep disorders. It's usually held the Friday before the spring vernal equinox, and so this year that's Friday the 18th of March. How about, does anybody else have sleep issues that they want to share with the general public right now? Either of you?
I have.
Sweyn?
I used to sleep very badly. I used to always wake up at ridiculous times, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. But then I've been taking medication for a while now, one of whose side effects is drowsiness. So I take that at night, and actually now I sleep a lot better than I used to. And I think it's made a huge difference to the way to my whole well-being. To have proper regular sleep, even if it is slightly medication induced. It's not sleeping. It's not sleeping medication, but it just makes me a bit drowsy.
Yeah. And Alastair, what about you? Sleep a thing you?
Yeah, my sleep's not too bad. I think the thing I tried about a year or so ago was trying to do naps. There is quite a lot of theory that doing naps for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sort of mid-afternoon, well, sort of after lunch, is beneficial. And I did actually do it for about a month or two, and actually it really did help, but it was just so difficult to build it in as a pattern into your day, because it's just such a strange idea that sort of you can sleep for 20-30 minutes and then actually be in better condition for the rest of the day. But it did really help. Yeah,
I mean, I can testify to that. I do naps, and when I was working for myself more, it was easier. Obviously now, I sometimes park the car up somewhere when I'm out for an event or something, and just grab 20 minutes, and it does make a big difference, I have to say. So I'm glad that I'm doing something right, and I hope I can do more things right. And I hope, I didn't realize it has such a detrimental effect. It's so severe. I mean, it was Shakespeare who said that sleep knits up the raveled sleeve of care, and I think it would that pertains to a lot of people, and obviously there's a lot of things to care about. So maybe sleep is one of the things.
The thing that surprised me about that on that page was the proportion of people affected. 45% of people, some extent or another. Wow. You don't really think of in those. I certainly haven't been thinking in those terms.
No.
Yeah.
And
there was a.
Go on, Alastair.
Sorry, I was just reminded. There's I think it's on BBC Three. There's a very good documentary on sleep and teenagers. And that was really interesting in terms of just sort of quite how severe, because a lot of the sleep discussions are about sort of, becoming old and, insomnia and so forth. But there's actually very, very big arguments and very big discussions about, growing up and sleep, which it was a really helpful documentary on sort of because my daughter, she does sort of talk about sleep as an issue, and I think we talking about it generationally would be helpful.
Yeah, good. Okay, and another day we picked up was the International Day of Happiness, which is another great thing to celebrate, and this is on the 20th of March. It's a fundamental human goal, and the United Nations General Assembly recognizes this goal and calls for a more inclusive, equitable and balanced approach to economic growth that promotes the happiness and well-being of all peoples. And on the 18th of March, the same day as World Sleep Day, the 10-year edition of the World Happiness Report is to be released at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, US and Canada. So I think it'd be good to have a look at that. And I mean, there are some countries are held to be more happy than others. Bhutan, I think, is one of the ones that's usually held up as a good example. Happiness. How do we promote happiness in our own lives? Alastair, are you a big promoter of happiness?
I remember doing some work in happiness research and sort of stuff to do with this. I think sort of, to be honest, I think where I am, it has to be said, it's more to do with self-care and kindness at the moment with myself rather than specifically happiness. So I think that's where I drifted, because a lot of the happiness research is interesting. But yeah, there's this sort of thing of trying to get past the happy clappy idea of happiness to the idea of an idea of contentment. Yeah.
And Sweyn, what about you?
No, I haven't really given this much thought at all. But I agree with when Alastair says, I mean, I find it quite difficult to deal sometimes with kind of very kind of surface, almost hostile happiness.
You must be happy. Yes. Yeah.
I find that quite hard to deal with sometimes, but it is important to find ways of not being unhappy and being content indeed.
Yeah. Okie doke. And one event that we picked up that's happening around this time, 18th of March, again, very popular day, this Friday, is an ESOL and digital inclusion meetup, which is a meetup for organizations in the online centers network that's coordinated by the Good Things Foundation that support ESOL learners, English for speakers of other languages, to gain digital skills and confidence. And this event is going to be chaired by Yasmin Akhtar of Go1 Alliance, who's part of my community digital skills network, and Vic Verdi of ACTA Training, and it'll give organizations the opportunity to talk about and share their experiences of how they support ESOL learners, challenges in supporting ESOL learners with digital and resources, tools and tips. So that seemed like a really good thing to see happening. I think like many other classes during lockdown, ESOL became less, I think it's funded less by the government now than it used to be, which is a shame. And I know that a lot of people went to ESOL classes, people I know in the areas I live in, went to ESOL classes for social reasons as well as learning and education. But I think there's nothing wrong with that. And so it'll be good to see how digital inclusion and ESOL are kind of happening now. And Online Centres Network, again, Northfield Community Partnership is one of those where I work. And so it'll be interesting to see how ESOL learners are being supported, because obviously being able to do this stuff online is critical to that sort of learning. Yeah. Have either of you had contact with people who have English as a speaker of other languages? Sweyn?
Very little, hardly ever, in fact.
And Alastair, yourself?
Yeah, and the changes the last couple of years is sort of doing a lot of online workshopping with particularly in Germany in the last year or two, and so yes, it's led to me taking a view on the kind of complexity of language I use, but also it means I've also been using stuff like the sort of automated subtitling and translation in PowerPoint. Has been really useful.
Yeah.
But I mean, it goes wrong every now and again. There's there are services, and also I've been in Zoom meetings where we've had translators, so translation channels operating. So I've seen it in operation. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, we've wondered about closed captions on this program, haven't we, Sweyn?
We have. I mean, we must do something about it.
Yeah,
there must be an answer.
Because you can do that with YouTube, can't you?
Yeah,
more easily than other things. Okay, well, let's press on and welcome our very special guest, Alastair Somerville. Alastair is somebody I met at a hack about probably 10 or 12 years ago now in Birmingham when he lived more in the Midlands. And he talks about sensory design and has 3 core design assumptions: that humans have extraordinary capacities, vast imaginations, and are kind. And he does public prototyping on Twitter. And his company, Acuity Design, works to enrich people's experiences of products, places, and services through physical and digital design. Alastair works closely with both public and private sector clients and their service users to co-create designs that work inclusively. And Alastair, we're delighted to have you on the show. We were talking earlier about the kind of things that you do, and it seems like being online and communicating and making things accessible is exactly your bag. So you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Alastair, you knew John Popham in some ways. You were saying in the 2000s and 2010s a bit. How did you know him?
Yeah, I think it was in those days. It was I was still living in Wolverhampton in those days, and there were a number of hackathon and cultural events stuff around Birmingham area of West Midlands, and he was one of those people who was attending so many events, and I merely encountered him at the ones that I happened to be at, and it was just that sense of presence, that sense of a person who was there trying to help others communicate better and more widely, which was what I remember of him. I can't honestly say if I've had a direct conversation with him, but he was always just slightly behind or near me or near the group of us.
Yes, I'm sure a lot of people will empathize with that kind of impression.
You said you were a theatre technician yourself in a previous existence, so that was part of your experience as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things which a lot of my life has always been about is that sort of I spent years sort of either working backstage or running theatre groups, and that sense of helping other people to be able to perform to the best is something which I've always liked. And it was something that sort of seemed to be about sort of what John was about, was that sense of the servant concept of helping others to help themselves be what they want to be and share with who they want to be, and that sort of sense. Other
guests we've had on the show who knew John as well just talk about how he used to try and create spaces where people could tell their own story. And that was very much what we relate to as well. And in my own life, I've done stage management, and I'm always happy. I love being in theatre, but I'm always happier behind the scenes. I have been persuaded to tread the boards as well, but not much. Very happy, setting up props and lighting and noticing at the last minute that the clock on the stage is in the second act is should have been advanced by an hour, and running on the stage and doing that and the excitement of that. And I suppose that's what led me to do be involved in St. Patrick's Day parade in Birmingham as well. Which sadly hasn't happened for the last couple of years. We're hoping to have it on the streets again next year. But yeah, making an environment so that other people can flourish and be visible and take center stage is something John, I think, felt strongly about, and how we've experienced him. Is that right, Sweyn?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I don't think I never met John actually in the same room, but I knew him really well through meeting him like this in Zoom. Well, not Zoom, but whatever we were using back then. And also because he was quite often the person who was making accessible to me, living away up in the north of Scotland, whichever event he was bringing online or live streaming or broadcasting in some way. So I really considered him to be a huge inspiration in that respect, of this trying to somehow make available events, stories, and other things, even if you couldn't, for whatever reason, be physically in the same place as where it's mainly going on. And he was just absolutely relentlessly passionate about that. All his work in broadband improvements, in live streaming, in events, in work with social enterprises, particularly in the housing sector. It was all about people, individuals and groups getting their stories out to others that might be interested in them. And he's a great miss. I miss him every day.
I think it's that sense of also that, I mean, rather like the technical stuff, making it so that the difficulty of the technology is invisible to the people who wish to share the stories.
Yes.
And also another thing. Oh, we're going like this for hours, because don't let me go on much longer, Pauline, will you? You can tactfully change the subject in a minute. Also, managing to use technology in a room where something's going on without completely overwhelming the event in the room and making it really weird. He was very good at just doing it unobtrusively in the room and making that room available to lots of other people in other places. There.
Yeah, well, I just want to add one final line this time maybe. The last event that I remember John live streaming was a NAVCA, National Association of Voluntary Community Action AGM or conference, where he had two cameras. I hadn't seen this previously. Two cameras, so getting two angles on the speaker, and I think he brought those presentations, which were excellent anyway, to a much wider audience and allowed much more engagement. And I think it made it a better event, obviously, and a much better organization actually. So yes, we could eulogize about John all day, but anyway, yes, we will move on. Alastair, back to you and your journey in digital. I know that this wasn't where you started off, so please do tell us about your early career and what brought you to what you do now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was not in digital in any way whatsoever. In some ways, because it didn't really exist in any way when I was young, to the same extent. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Wolverhampton, and to the main extent is that my family have been for hundreds of years were nail makers, so we're hard industry. So originally Scottish, my family were Stirling based, but both my parents moved to Wolverhampton in the 50s, and we had nail making factory in the Midlands, and so I took over from my father and so forth. But the way that we worked internationally because we exported a lot, and we worked with technology to a certain extent, but for the most part we were in hydraulics rather than electronics. But sort of early 2000s, mid 2000s, we were torn apart by the dollar moving one way and steel prices moving another way. And so after hundreds of years, we had to shut down. And so to some extent, I was at a loose end in terms of work. And also, if you've worked for yourself, and certainly worked in a sort of nail making factory, basically you're unemployable because you've been a managing director of a manufacturing plant, and therefore your skill set is slightly bizarre. So I had to set up something by myself to some extent. And so I went into 3D printing, which was because it looked interesting and it seemed to be an area which was worthwhile, but more looked at the use of the technology in cultural industries, so museums and so forth. And so I ran that for a little while. To be honest, it was a bit early. That was 2008-ish, and 3D printing in those days was just slightly too expensive and also slightly too difficult to explain to museums why the hell they should do it. And so we did some projects in sort of UK and Europe and elsewhere. But A, it wasn't really profitable, and B, actually one of the things which came out of it was actually not so much the replication of the object, but one of the things which came out of the digital side of it was we could manipulate the objects we were replicating and create new meanings. And particularly when talking about people with visual impairments, merely replicating an object doesn't really mean anything, because, you know, a replicated plate is a replicated plate. It still remains completely meaningless in a sense. So digital allowed us to manipulate the meaning of objects, and that became much more interesting to me in terms of we can use digital to create new ways of creating information in multimodal senses, you know, in terms of we can use the digital to make different tactile, we can use the digital to make different audio, we can use the digital to make different video, and, you know, that sense that we can manipulate information streams to be able to meet the needs of differing people, and for people to be able to create their own different information because it matches their personal sense of perception. And that's why I went into sensory design to a certain extent, it was this sense that we have a multitude of new tools which are digitally based, some of which are very complex, some of which are very simple. And we can use them to actually create a divergence and a diversity of meanings, so that we can just do extraordinary things. And you know, that encounters my human-centered design sense of, you know, this extraordinary capacities and vast imagination. You know, we have these tool sets which allow us to do that, either in the sense that we make them for people, but I vastly prefer to make stuff with people, in the sense that we offering tools and saying, look, we can do all of this. What would be helpful? What would be meaningful? And that's so I drifted more into the sort of design of materials, and so I advise sort of people like sort of English Heritage and others on maps and signage and wayfinding. And then about 2014, it was the height of the arrival of wearable tech, and it was very clear that the people designing wearable tech didn't have the foggiest idea about how human senses worked. So I actually created a workshop. You know, I never worked in workshops. You know, I was always, you know, going back to the earlier discussion, I was much more of a sort of, you know, in the background, on the side of the room kind of person. The idea of centering myself and talking about stuff to be able to get people to understand that what they were saying and what they were doing was terrible, was very weird. So, but I did, and so I started doing workshops, and in many ways, a lot of what I do nowadays cascaded from there, in that the design of workshops to help people to understand their experiences and their perception better, so that they could design better for other people and more inclusively, and, you know, more accepting of the sort of the way in which we have so many differing ways of perceiving and sensing. And a lot of my work nowadays is in that sort of workshop work, that designing workshops to enable people to find their own sense of themselves in order to design better for the sense of other people.
So would you have gone to events like Museum Camp, Alastair?
Oh yes, yeah. No, I remember there was specifically one event at the new gallery in Walsall. Actually, it was quite helpful because we had done if you go to the new gallery in Walsall, then there is actually a 3D print of Oscar Wilde's tomb, which was part of one of our projects, where we replicated the tomb, which is in Paris, while the design sketches are in the Walsall gallery.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, I was just, when you were speaking, you reminded me of Mara Dixon, and because I've met her at other events, and you know, it seems like she does, you know, there'll be crossover there with the work that she does.
Yeah,
you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Mara. I mean, she does. I mean, she's very, very good at this sort of, particularly the social media and the sort of those sort of sense of creating events in that. And so yes, she's done a hell of a lot.
Speaking of social media, Alastair, actually, you're very generous at sharing your thoughts and ideas and stuff on Twitter, for example, is where I see a lot of what you write, and LinkedIn more recently, I think. Were you an early adopter of that? How did you come to be on social media?
I use Twitter a lot. I mean, and it's in many ways because it's where I find Twitter useful mostly for my own selfish purposes, in that I find it useful to be able to put down very short sentences of ideas or short pieces of, a photo or whatever. And actually, it's helpful for me because it allows me to track my thinking over time. So the way in which I public prototype, so almost all my work, at the moment I'm designing a workshop for some people at the end of this month. Almost all of the materials which are being designed are there, and to some extent I do get feedback from some people over time, but in many ways I use it to be able to put stuff out there, because there's that sense that in order to be able to understand a thing better yourself, you need to share it and tell it to other people, and then see whether it makes sense when you look at it, in a critical sense from your own sort of looking back at it.
So you're almost using Twitter as a means of, as it were, working in the open, as they say in some contexts.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I can't, I can't understand things well unless I can find a way of describing them to other people. I mean, there's reasonable neuroscience on this sort of the way in which the brain itself tells stories to itself in order to understand what it should maintain and what it should prune. That sense that storytelling is fundamental to be able to create human understanding, but also that sense that you need to share stories with other people to be able to find whether it means anything to anyone else.
Yeah. And have you had any unusual responses to your sharing like that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't get much in the way of negative, but I mean, that's inherent in being a white man. So there's levels of privilege in operation here. So no, I don't think I get strange sort of reactions. I think it's just sort of because I think that's one of the things about Twitter is that it rolls past. Sort of there's moments, and there are moments which can be meaningful. I mean, there's moments of criticism, and I do take on board criticism. I have changed a number of things because people have criticized things in ways in which I can understand what they're trying to get at, and I think that's the point. There are times where I have been pained by what's been said, but you work through it.
And you I know I've received at least one of your prototypes. You post things out to people, cards and stuff like that. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, I've particularly over the last couple of years, when in-person workshops have gone away, and also when things have become slightly more international because in-person has gone away. The sort of the sense of global has actually expanded quite extraordinarily in the last couple of years. The use of, I mean, I've always in workshops used a lot more physical props than a lot of people. I use cards, dice, many other different things to be able to, because I believe that people should physically manipulate things in order to understand them better. I do work in experiential. And therefore using cards, sending cards out and all the rest of it strikes me as worthwhile, because there's a certain sense that there's something good about sending gifts to people, and there's something good about receiving gifts. But there's also this physicality. And I think one of the things which comes up is trying to use these physical cards and things with information on them to minimize the amount of online time. And I know this may sound like a strange thing, but spending a lot of time online telling people what you need to, trying to lecture people online is deeply uncomfortable to me. I really prefer not to do it. So any way in which I can put content to cards or put them into different formats strikes me as better, because it means that we can spend more time when we are online with each other talking, rather than endless PowerPoints.
Yeah, so real discussion rather than endless presentation. So that sense of so I think sort of the cards and so forth have, I've changed a lot of that over the last couple of years, because I was beginning, it took me a while to understand what was going on when we
lost in person and, you know, went to hybrid. But yeah, I think early on I realized I needed to start using the post more often. I got to know postal times much better over time.
Yes,
I think the whole idea of trying to take offline some of the stuff that we would maybe normally naturally do when we're in person together in meeting rooms and so on. I think it's a really tricky, complicated area, and it's one that I'm not sure we're thinking about enough even now, because I think that a lot of our lives could be made a lot better if we could somehow manage to take things offline, put it, or not even offline, just out of the live interaction space into wikis or cards or whatever. And the old saying that this meeting could have been an email.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated now, but it's the same kind of thing. This online thing that we're all attending together right now, this could have been a website or an email or something, at least part of it. And then we could have come together and actually talked about what was in the original thing. And I think it's great to see you and others take that on. The other person that I've been really impressed with in terms of hybrid working lately, and I've mentioned her before on the show, is a woman called Judy Rees, who seems to be specializing now in advising and consulting on making your event, whether it's 2 people or 2,000 people, hybrid. And I find it quite interesting that she says, if purely about events, she says she's quite clear, you know, try to avoid making it hybrid, consider having it all online or all in person. But she's not talking about she doesn't mean put everything that you would do in person online. She's also saying if you're doing online events, prepare everyone better, allow them to interact with the material before they arrive and afterwards. And it's an area of work that I find really fascinating, and I think we need to spend an awful lot more time on as we hopefully come out of the worst restrictions and cancellations and so on. Because it'd be a shame to lose all this new stuff as we go back into person.
Alastair, you've been leading a lot of work in that area. Please do tell us more about what you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, just go back to what Sweyn was saying, just say it there. I think one of the things which came out of the last couple of years, and I also luckily I was able to do more reading the last couple of years, I finally got around to reading Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering, which people had been recommending to me for years. And I think it's interesting what she was talking about there, which was a lot of what she's talking about is how much you invest in the before and how much you invest in being clear in your invitations and how important the invitation is in terms of setting up the sense of what the event will be. And also, I think there's a very good word of mouth Radio 4 series. There's one on digital body language, which was I think about November last year, but it's available online. And that was very good about a discussion about how much people completely misunderstand digital information, i.e. emails. You know, wild misunderstanding of text messages, emails, or any of these things. You know, huge misunderstandings, and therefore the need, and particularly in emotional terms. And one of the things which was really useful was the discussion of being much more explicit about what the hell it is that you are going to do and want to think about. And it's sort of, I think we still are, we're assuming there's a level of social presence, you know, being able to see the body language, understand the feelings of other people, which just isn't there particularly in digital. And being really, really explicit, you know, and this is, you know, when I send materials now, I am much more direct in saying we are going to be talking about hard subjects, we are going to talk about self-care, we are going to talk about things. We need you, and I need you to not merely be aware of your own personal, self-care in a sense, but also to be able to say that you should be able to take action. I have told people, if you are not in the right place for the workshop when we meet up on Zoom, do not attend. We can talk about it later, we can do other stuff. I have had, in the last couple of years, I have had workshops where no one turned up. And that was good. Yeah. It's weird as hell for me. but and then in the hours afterwards, after sort of no one comes, people have said, there was a work crisis, there was a family crisis, there was, I just didn't feel like it, and that's good. That's people actually taking on the sense of self-care that, people sort of, it's very easy to set events and to run and facilitate events and to not realize how much, bullying power that you have.
The tyranny of attendance, as it were. I think that's really interesting, because that's kind of a flip side of what some people who are organizing and providing events might see as a downside of online events, which is to say that particularly if they're free or not involving a huge amount of monetary investment, the impression that you get is that people are less likely to be committed to attending. But actually, that isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's quite often described as a negative thing by event organizers. Well, we're not going to do it online because people just say they'll come and then they don't come. We want to make sure we get definite number of people in a room and they're definitely committed to doing it. So we're going to have it in Stirling or Gloucester or somewhere really easy to get to from the rest of the country, or really hard to get to if you've got caring responsibilities or whatever. But the more flexible you are about the provision of online stuff, the more factors can get in the way of individuals attending, and I guess that's what you're kind of gathering up in your concept of self-care there.
Yeah, I mean, it's there is this sense that sort of we still, and I still haven't really quite worked through my own thoughts on this. We are still very, very trapped by the idea that we are attending in a room, and the idea that we are coming into a room and you should have permission to come into the room and you should stay in the room, and all these sort of things. That sense of physicality of the metaphor of the room is a bit weird when you're online. We don't it doesn't matter how many people are in the room.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if people leave or come and go. What does it matter? There's I spend a lot of time self-criticizing in terms of how do I actually transfer power for myself? How do I actually enable people to actually have actual control over their learning process, or their sort of their the way in which they want to be with people or not. There's always that sense of I remember having to change both in person and hybrid in terms of making sure people aren't forced to be in activities or forced to speak up. Why do you demand this of people? Why should you demand this of people? One should just take people in the way in which they wish to be there, the presence they wish to have.
One of the most transformative things about attending unconferences and bar camps and golf camps and museum camps and so on is that fundamental principle of that kind of open space type event, which is, if you don't feel that you're making a proper contribution, or this place that you're in now doesn't serve your needs today, move from this room to a different room, move around. Don't feel tied in to one place. And I found that immensely ridiculously liberating since I first came across it about a dozen or so years ago, because even it's an attitude of mind, because even if you kind of do have to stay in the room, it kind of frees you to think, well, actually, this isn't worth the time. I'm going to not necessarily fully engage with this. I'm going to, choose positively to. It is take care of yourself. It's to take care of yourself, to actually disengage slightly from this thing that you're trapped in the middle of a row somewhere in an auditorium.
It also you know, calls on the mindfulness of the other participants to not be offended if someone leaves, and not, you know, for the leader not to think, oh, this is criticism of me. It's not. It's just a person taking their own self seriously.
Yeah, and it's sorry.
Carry on, Alastair.
No, I was just sort of going to say, you know, this a lot of this is, I think one of the things is being very, and again, going back to the thing about being explicit, is if you are doing events, being very explicit, that not merely being aware of your self-care, but actually enabling people to take action. You know, one of the things which I'm doing for a workshop in a couple of weeks is the stuff that goes on the table is, here are questions about self-care to ask yourself in terms of, you know, emotions and so forth, but also actions in terms of sort of, you know, do speak up, do say no. You know, telling people explicitly you can say no.
Very, and it's something that we many young people, children especially, aren't. That's not how they're educated. They are encouraged in education, most education settings, formal education settings, to comply, and, you know, because that makes it easier for the educators to run things, and so it's going against our initial conditioning, I think, to do that. But it's great if it can be done. Alastair, you have been running some hybrid events. What's been your experience of that, and what's worked and what hasn't worked?
So hybrid for me, so early on in the sort of the last couple of years, I stopped doing workshops altogether because I could not see how to do experiential workshops in a sort of completely sort of hybrid sense. I started doing workshops, and I think sort of what the two things which came out of my viewpoints of this was what we've already talked about, which is telling people much earlier what's going to go on, being much more explicit about what's going to occur when they are together. And so that whole sense of talking to people through the email, I record podcasts more often now. A lot of my content goes to podcast. You know, I've done workshops where we've been doing daily events, and then there's been a daily 5-minute podcast just to sort of talk about what's going to happen. Because again, this thing of trying to give people the information that they can access it when they feel that they are in the right time and place. So, you know, podcasts are actually quite helpful in terms of you can listen to it in the kitchen or listen to it on a short walk or whatever, rather than demanding that people come to the time and the place defined by myself or by the event. So that idea of enabling, you know, this sort of the horrible language of synchronous and asynchronous, but that sort of designing.
I love it. It's lovely and technical.
But that sense of being able to give people the content not just at the time defined by myself or by the organizers or by the company, whatever.
Broadcasters would call that offline, but we don't mean offline. We mean just not at the time we were all together.
Yeah. So that sense of, you know, telling people more upfront, spreading the content across different ways of doing it. Also, one of the things about doing the podcast, and again, in sort of the way in which technology has changed, is, of course, now I use Otter AI much more, because that allows me to extract the text from the speech. And that's also really helpful in terms of being able to create more content in more formats for more people to be able to use.
Great.
Which I think is really helpful. And a lot of this sort of this way in which things have changed, I think, is really helpful for more, you know, I'm bringing it, now that in person is coming back in, I'm bringing a lot of this stuff back into the in person, because, you know, telling people more explicitly what's going to happen, whether it be an online event or an in-person event, it's still good manners. And it still helps people feel their sense of autonomy. Making content available in different ways, in terms of, you know, whether it be an audio or video or text, is still better. All of these things are just making life better for more people in more ways.
Great.
And again, this goes back to this digital thing of digital allows us a multitude of tools and a multitude of channels in order to be able to meet people where they feel comfortable.
Great. Yeah. And Sweyn just brought up Otter there on screen, which is has a free pricing option, as well as being able to pay for it. And I
the
know
website is Otter.ai, and it's very simple.
It was a game changer for me a while ago, and I've been encouraging other people to use it, as well as dictate in Word and stuff. And earlier, Sweyn had on screen the Goodreads version of the Art of Gathering that you mentioned with Priya Parker. So it's we'll put links to those on the YouTube page after the show. So for you, Alastair, hybrid is not a mixture of people attending in person and on Zoom, for example, as a medium in an event. It's more about the whole encompass the preparation for the event, as well as having it, and then the follow-up.
I sort of, I mean, there is a hybridization in one sense, that one of the things which I found interesting in the last couple of years was that a lot of the way in which people feel the work from home thing has created a much greater sense of people feeling lonely in terms of their attending events, and that loss of social presence, that loss of social connection. And I think that was one of the reasons I started doing 2-for-1 ticketing, in terms of just bring a friend, because there was a lot of ways in which we could discuss faking social presence or social connection. It's like, just bring a bloody friend.
Because as you say, I mean, to a first approximation, it doesn't really matter how many people are in the room when you're doing a digital thing. So if half the people do bring a friend, then it's not really going to impact greatly on
other people's
what
experience.
You're doing. It's a great idea.
And also,
that's taking offline not only when you do stuff, but also who is doing it. It's a kind of a whole other dimension of
why not have other people in the room at the same time? Exactly. It doesn't need to be single faces in single windows.
Great. Yeah, it reminds me a bit of data dives. The data kind do, they don't just want techie coding people there. They also want subject matter experts, people who have had life experience, because it adds to the richness of the whole output at the end. And I've seen that happen, and it's been very, very valuable. Alastair, we're going to be covering a few of the other stories we've picked up along the ways in the last week or two. If people want to find you online, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I mean, Twitter is where I am the majority of the time, and the easiest way. So Acuity _ design. The website's acuity.design. No,
both of
Twitter.
those are in the description of this YouTube video, along with links to the other things that we've mentioned during the conversation. That I've been doing that synchronously in real time, so they're already there.
Excellent. Yeah, so feel free to comment on any of the stories, other stories you picked up, Alastair. It's been really good, and I hope you found it interesting and useful as well.
That's a great chat. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I mean, just offhand, and just to do the one advert, I am doing a thing on designing hybrid workshops in April.
Oh, excellent.
And I just happen to have that in the YouTube description as well. So if you're interested in that, you'll find that in the YouTube description too, because I'm attending this next one. I have forgotten to attend for no good reason, for no good self-care reason. I just completely forgot to attend in your last one, so I'm very pleased to be attending this time.
And so that does have the postcard, it has the podcast, and it does have the Zoom meeting. And it does have the whole discussion of, because a lot of that whole workshop is, how do we actually offer safety to people? So because it's the thing I'm most interested in. So yeah, do come along if you want.
Yeah,
great. Thanks, Alastair. So back to our stories, and we picked up one about UK volunteers urged to cold call Russia to counter Putin's propaganda. It's one that Sweyn picked up recently. So if we bring that up, Sweyn, it's from The Guardian.
Yes, I've got so many windows open, it'll take me a moment to find, but keep going.
Yeah, okay. So this is one from The Guardian, as we say, and it tells us that Russian speakers in the UK are being urged to phone ordinary citizens in Russia to counter the Kremlin's propaganda and media blackout about the war in Ukraine. And it's got a hashtag Call Russia. It was launched, it says on Tuesday, which I presume was last week sometime, the 9th of March. Yeah.
I believe it was launched by some people in Lithuania.
Okay.
Their idea.
So it urges volunteers to cold call Russians in order to challenge Vladimir Putin's narrative about the invasion, one conversation at a time, and uses an open database of 40 million phone numbers in Russia, which members of the Russian diaspora in the UK and elsewhere have begun to call. And this is part of an ambitious non-violent campaign to help end the war. And volunteers include Lydia, a 29-year-old Moscow-born accountant from Huddersfield, who says, "This is a great way to try to make a connection with real people who, in my view, have the power to enact change in Russia." Obviously, that's a great link for us, Huddersfield, because that's where John used to live.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. The guidelines for volunteers begin with the warning that calls will be very difficult. And of the more than 20 calls Lydia has made so far, many have ended abruptly with the phone being put down as soon as she mentioned Ukraine. And other people have asked hostile questions like who in the West is paying you. But Lydia does feel that she's already changed some minds in Russia. And she said, you only need one conversation where you feel you have made someone doubt what they're hearing day in, day out on state media to make you feel like it's worth it. So we're just saying that's an option for people to take part in if they want to, call the hashtag being Call Russia.
I think the suggestion is that you should be able to speak Russian before you volunteer for that. But I just thought that was a very interesting use of a whole pile of online, digital, and analog tools to actually take action about some situation that you want to change. In this case, it's public opinion in Russia. But the website will generate you a randomly chosen phone number in Russia. There's a big database of Russian phone numbers that they're using. It's war, so I guess that's okay. Might be a bit dubious about that if it was trying to sell something. But the other thing I should say about this, though, is that when I posted that in a local group saying, isn't this interesting? I did get some pushback saying, really, is that really a good use of individuals' time? Should we not more consider in some way trying to fund the alternative media in Russia, so in other words, to give some of our money towards that difficult situation rather than necessarily spend our time doing this? And I guess there's always arguments to be had about that way. I think the thing that I liked about this one is that it gives people who are qualified the ability to take a personal action, and it should be proof against almost any type of suppression. I think it's quite easy to fund. I think it would be quite easy. It would be quite easy to fund alternative media in Russia and see the station or the paper or the journalist shut down in some way. And I think, as usual with these things, it's always do both if you can. Absolutely,
I was just going to say that you don't have to choose. It's
that's right.
It's not, both are options. So that. Thanks for bringing that up, Sweyn. The next one we're from our friend Ross McCullough in Scotland again. And he tweeted about 10 tools to transform your charity's online comms. And Sweyn found this on Twitter. And it's a thread featuring animation, free ad budget, user insights, video editing, podcasting, and more. And many of these tools are free or have a hefty non-profit discount, such as Canva, well known to lots of us in the sector. With Canva, you can create high-impact social media graphics and marketing materials, and it's free for non-profit organizations. There is you have to sign up and stuff for that, but that's well worth knowing. And it's free. It's free at another level as well, so it's very useful, and I use it a lot. There's one called Hotjar, which helps you to understand how visitors to your website behave and how they make decisions. Again, free to charities. And again, this is something that's been mentioned more recently to me from other places as well. And if you're not wanting to understand how visitors to your website behave, what are you doing having a website? Really, So it's yes, I strongly recommend that one. I am going to be encouraging that with all the people whose websites I have an influence on. And the third one is Google Ad Grants, and I've never really got my head around this, but the blurb says that it gives you access to $120,000 of ad spend per annum. And with this, you can raise awareness, attract donors, and recruit new volunteers using Google search ads. So, you know, that's not a small amount of money for lots of small charities, especially to take advantage of. So we'd be
It's one I'd never
pleased to
heard of.
hear.
I'd never heard of that.
All right.
before.
Okay.
I mean, I heard of most of the other 10. There's a whole lot more. It's a
Yeah.
long Twitter thread of just really useful resources for non-profits and charities. But I'd never heard of that Google Ad grant scheme before, and it looks great.
Alastair, what are your favorite tools that are any of those amongst your tools, or do you have other tools that you're fond of?
Canva, I vaguely know. To be absolutely honest, I am terrible at the whole SEO thing, and fail very badly at that stuff. No, I mean the stuff I've used in the last year or so, I think, is mostly in sort of terms of better and lighter tools for making stuff, content accessible. Sort of because I'm, using the phone a lot more. So, I mean, going back to the sort of discussion about subtitling and so forth, there's iOS app called Mixed Captions I've used a hell of a lot in the last year for translating my sort of videos so they've got subtitling, and that's a very good lightweight tool which doesn't really cost much and does a hell of a lot in terms of making it so you actually can create all the subtitle content you want just on your phone.
Can you say what it's called?
It's
again?
called Mixed Captions.
Mixed Captions. Okay.
Mix, M-I-X.
Mixed captions. Yeah. Okay.
That's one of the most effective pieces of kit I've come across in the last year. I think sort of that's that sense of sort of, I don't pay for a lot of heavy technology. I use sort of Serif rather than Adobe for doing design work. I use local printers for creating the cards and things. So it's trying to find minimal cost ways of doing stuff is what I'm mostly interested in. But yeah, I think there's a few things I will pay for because they provide benefit.
I think most of the things on Ross's list, they do have a cost. It's just that they're heavily discounted for non-profits.
Yeah.
A couple of things are free or there's a basic version, but most of them there would be a cost. It's just that it might not be quite as expensive as you might imagine.
Okie doke. We'll fit in a couple more stories, I think, before we close, Sweyn. So we're working backwards on our usual grid at the moment.
I'm keeping up though, don't worry.
Very good. The next one was the Recycle IT plan to bridge the digital divide in Bolton. And this is a no social enterprise founded by a former big issue vendor has come to Bolton and aiming to bridge the digital divide in the borough. It's called Recycle IT, and it works by collecting unwanted computers and IT equipment from around Greater Manchester and processes them at their workshop in Commerce House, Bolton. And then the computers are made available at affordable prices to those most in need, while anything not salvageable is then used for art projects, which is a nice foray, a nice tangent. And the enterprise is now able to collect all IT equipment from businesses and is also accepting donations from people in the community. And the founder, John Hastings, is hoping to forge stronger connections with people and organizations across Bolton. They started trading in October 2021, and it's logged over 340 items from laptops, base units, and flat screens to mobile phones, tablets, and routers. So they've successfully diverted 1,656 kilos of equipment away from toxic waste sites, and instead are able to put it to more useful purposes. So well done to Recycle IT. We know there are other projects like that around the country, and it's just not good to hear about one that's happening locally. One more story, I think, the digital inclusion in London, the Lottie report that has come out. I think that came out in February by the looks of the URL. And this is a comprehensive report outlining the approaches undertaken by the public, private and third sectors in tackling digital exclusion in London, and brings to light the range of digital inclusion interventions gathered from Lottie's crowdsourcing exercise, as well as the challenges and success factors in setting up digital inclusion interventions. And this is for anyone seeking to develop a local digital inclusion strategy, a digital inclusion project or program of activities. So we recommend that, and we'll give you the link on the YouTube page when we finish the show. So that brings us to the end of today's show. Thanks again, Alastair, for joining us. We're delighted you were able to give us some of your valuable time, and thanks for being a very interesting guest, as most of our guests are. We learned a lot, and we wish you well. And Sweyn's looking forward to your workshop very much, and I'll try and catch up with one as well soon. So thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good week.
Have a
Bye.
good week.
Bye.